If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what is the creepiest, scariest, strangest unexplained experience/story you've had, heard, or know? I never tell this story because of what I want others to believe about me, and because it truly scares me. In fact, it scares me more than anything else in my life. More than my rational fears, more than any real risk. This is the most terrifying experience of my life. It was 2008. I was recently married and my wife and I had driven to Vegas from Flagstaff for dinner. After an evening there we were driving back because we had no money for a hotel. I hadn't been drinking, I was of a stable mind. It was late and I was a bit tired, but I was young and had some coffee. It after midnight, and lightly snowing. My wife was asleep next to me as I drove, and I was listening to some AM country music. I like drives like that, I just relax and think. I don't believe in the supernatural. Even when I was a Christian I was never very into the ethereal world, of angels and demons and ghosts. I never felt very spiritual. But as I drove along, on this empty road, I heard my wife say something. I looked at her, and she was asleep, but I looked through her window and saw something running next to my car. He was about the height of the truck, maybe a little taller. He ran full speed. He had long dark hair and piercing eyes, and a nose like a muzzle but to a point, like a coyote. He had a beaded shirt, with beads that made a shallow V across his chest. His arms were scrawny and face sunken, and hairy. As he ran, he turned to me and bared his teeth. I immediately lost all breath from my lungs and was frozen. I gripped the wheel to control the vehicle and turned away from him and looked back. He was losing lateral distance from the vehicle but still keeping pace. I turned back to the road and hit the gas. I looked over again and he was gone. I looked in the rear view mirror and saw nothing in the road. Nothing ahead. I sat frozen holding the wheel and speeding down the road. I hadn't made a noise, my wife hadn't woken up. I didn't say anything, I didn't stop the rest of the way either. When I got to Flagstaff I woke my wife and we went to bed, but I could not sleep. Even as I write this I have a terrible feeling of dread. I've spent tons of time in the desert, in the forest, camping, hiking. I feel fine at night in a cemetery. I have seen flying objects and assumed a logical reason for them. But I have no explanation for what happened that night. I saw that. It happened. Maybe I fell asleep, maybe it was a dream, but I don't personally believe it. That thing was there. Years later I recounted this story to someone who lived in the area, who was a native. They told me that what I saw was a skinwalker, and it made sense. Right now I'm afraid, a grown man can be drawn close to tears from this. I don't believe in gods, I don't believe in angels or ghosts. But I believe in skinwalkers. One time when I was a kid, my friend and I were out adventuring near a big factory in our city, that was surrounded by tons and tons of trees that weren't cared for. My friend wanted to go on the tree grounds to look for lizards and cicadas, and I followed him around. We shuffled through trees and bushes. After a while he said he noticed something inside a gap in a tree, so he picked up a stick to poke at the gap. I was on the other side of the tree. All of a sudden I just heard him yell, "Super huge spider." I turned around to face the tree and along came this massive, quick as hell green brownish looking spider, the size and morphology just like a facehugger from the Alien movies, that crawled in a spiral downwards the tree. Having never witnessed anything like that my whole life, I yelped like a little the sight of it and took off running as fast as I could, my friend right behind me. After a few seconds he said, "Wait. Let's go back to get a good look at it." But there was no way in hell I'd want to go anywhere near that thing. However, after much convincing I agreed go to back, but only if we stay the hell away a good distance. So we found our way back to that tree, and that cursed thing is still hanging around there, staying unmoving, not even micro movements. We tried to get the best look at it as we could while trying to stay at a safe distance. I remember that it had long legs just like the facehugger, just minus the tail. One strange thing about it was it had this white and pinkish looking disc of flesh under its body that's wider than the body itself. My friend got a longer stick to poke at the thing and made it move a bit before it moved around to the other side of the tree where we can't see it anymore. We would have to get closer to the tree in order to get to the other side of it, and frankly at that point we were both too freaked out to do that, so we just booked it out of there. Later on we told our other friends about it and no one believed us. It was the early 90s. Two of my buddies and I were hanging out in our church parking lot late after church was over one night. It was pitch black save for the single street lamp in the middle of the parking lot. We were sitting in the back of Don's truck near the light. To my right was the external building that housed the kitchen. The church building, also to my right but a little bit behind me, is attached to the kitchen by an open foyer. Behind both buildings is the multi-acre graveyard, with oldest graves over a century old. Beyond the graveyard is pasture land and woods. To my left, running in front of the buildings and parking lot, is the main country road with more open pasture land across the road. We were sitting there shooting shit, just passing time and having a good time talking about random things under the sun. Suddenly Jim shot a look into the blackness across the road and had a confused look on his face. We asked him what was up, and he said, "You guys didn't hear that?" He claimed he heard a deep growl off in the distance somewhere in the pasture. So we sat in silence for a minute or so, listening intently. Nothing but the summer breeze through the oak trees could be heard. Don and I shrugged and jokingly accused Jim of making shit up to scare us. Slowly the conversation resumes and we think nothing more of it. Out of nowhere, both Don and Jim popped their heads in the direction of the pasture again. Don asked, "Is that what you heard?" Jim said yes. I heard nothing and figured they must have gotten together when I wasn't paying attention. They described it as a deep growl with almost a bit of laughter. I just laughed it off myself, telling them to quit messing around. They both looked at each other, though, with a bit of a scared look. Why we didn't leave at that point, I don't know, but young stupid males ain't too bright. Again, we listened for a while but heard nothing more than a cow mooing in the distance. Again, we go back to talking, but Don and Jim both keep bringing it up with each other, saying maybe it was a coyote or a cow or something. I thought the joke was getting old, so I kept trying to steer the conversation away to other, more important things like video games and women. But then we heard it. We all heard it. This deep, guttural, hellish growling laugh echoed from the graveyard through the foyer between the kitchen and church. Recalling the sound now brings the hair on my neck to attention. We all froze in fear for a few seconds, and without a word we all jumped out of the truck, ran to our respective vehicles, and hightailed it out of there. I have no idea what it was. Someone playing a prank? Possibly, most likely. A sick coyote with a deep damn voice? Unlikely, but maybe it was some sort of animal making sounds. A demon? Nah, surely not. But whatever it was, we have no idea what the fuck it actually was because it scared us shitless. To this day, we still bring it up occasionally. We call it the laughing growling thing because of how it sounded. Curiosity makes me wonder if we would have found out what it was if we had stayed. The deep recesses of my mind tell me I don't want to know. So my granddad used to tell us this story because my brothers and I found it fascinating. I'll probably butcher a minor detail or two, but I'm pretty certain on a lot of it. I'll point out where I could be wrong. So my granddad and his family grew up in rural southern Ireland, so their fields, moors and rivers galore, and family all lived pretty near each other. There was an old tale that existed in the area that went something along the lines of if you hear music coming from seemingly nowhere, leave. Someone is in danger. So my granddad and his brother Nicky were out on the moors, when all of a sudden they both hear music, and they do not know where it was coming from. Naturally, following the tale, they left, and returned home. When they got back though, they found that their cousin, I think, was missing. Several days had passed, and there had been no trace of her. It was like she vanished. But one night, in a storm, she was suddenly at the door. Soaking wet, but seemingly unharmed. When people asked her where she was, she would only ever reply, "I was listening to the music." This is all she would respond with when asked about the whole situation, even up until the day she died. My granddad unfortunately passed away in December of 2013 to cancer, but his brother Nicky is still around, still living in Ireland, and he swears it to be true. You hear all the time about my cousin's aunt's brother who is twice removed having something happen to them, but something about having it happen to someone very close to you, and then other people backing it up seems to really hit home. I grew up on the west coast of Ireland, in County Galway. One night when I was around 16 years of age I woke up in the middle of a fucking gale with rain pelting the windows and wind whistling through the cracks. Now on this night there was only myself and the mother and the sisters inside in the house as the father was away minding the cattle due to it being calving season. Normally I'd be helping him out, pulling calves out of cows' venas and the like, but not so on this night. We had these spotlights to illuminate the outside of the house, and one of these spotlights shone directly up into my window, and even with the curtains closed it would lighten up the room. The shadows of branches and long blades of grasses would project onto the ceiling, and the gale being what it was caused a frantic wildness to characterize this night's shadow play. I watched the shadows on the ceiling and listened to the wind roar outside for a short while. In fairness though, I was busting for a piss, so I sat up to take off me blanket and looked over at the door. Well fuck. My view of the door was such that I couldn't from my bed see into the hallway unless the door was wholly ajar. The door was only slightly cracked. But it was open enough to allow the width of a human arm. And there extending into the room was just that. The arm was pale white and judging by the shape of the hand on the end of it appeared to be female. It had a classic shroud-like sleeve ending a few inches before the wrist. It waved palm side down for about 5 seconds and then retracted. Now the gale and the lights and shadows and all that was bearable. Even the arm and hand would have been grand enough, I could have pegged it down to that sleep paralysis crack. But Jesus Christ, the way that arm retracted back into the hallway. And the way the door handle moved downwards as the arm retracted and the way the fucking door slammed after it. I couldn't fucking breath. The way the door closed made me sweat like a blind lesbian in a fish market. I began to roar and shout and managed to get me bedside lamp on and covers off and began running around the room, opening the door of the hallway into nothingness, not a soul awake in the fucking house besides myself and the ghost. I ran at 16 years of age into the mother's room roaring me arse off about ghosts, and she woke up and blearily told me to shut the fuck up, you'll wake your sisters. Well, I calmed down and slept on the floor in the mother's room that night. Now that house had been built by my parents. No one had died in it, nothing else even slightly paranormal happened in that house before or since. A few weeks later though, I was talking to the neighbor, an old alcoholic bachelor who had lived in the area his entire life. I told him about the ghost and his wiry smile got wider and he laughed. Well, sure isn't the bit of land your folks built that house on called Croc na See by the old people of the village. And sure in Irish doesn't that mean Hill of the Fairies? My mom is a real estate agent in a very rural area. She often goes to old foreclosed farmhouses that she is selling and tries to get good interior shots to post online. There was one house that was in pretty bad shape because it had been left empty all winter and was a pretty old house. Anyway, mom starts taking pictures. My mom isn't one to get scared easily by old houses. She really enjoys going to old houses alone and exploring. So she wasn't jumpy or expecting anything bad. She does this stuff all the time. She's taking pictures of the rooms and everything is going great until she gets to this one room halfway down the hall. Her camera flashes, but no picture is showing up. She tries several more times, illuminating the room with flash, but still getting no image. She assumes her camera is broken, but continues down the hallway to explore the house herself. She gets to a bathroom at the back of the house and sees that the water in the toilet is frozen, not winterized, TSK, and laughs. Not thinking, she pulls out her camera and takes a picture. It works. She's pretty pumped because now that means she can go back to the room and finally get that picture. When she goes back to take a picture of the room, the same thing happens. Flash, but no picture. Then things get weird. She hears a mutter/whisper sound from right behind her. Like someone was right over her shoulder. It was unintelligible rambling, but she said it sounded urgent and agitated. She spun around and no one was there. That's when she felt the icy pit in her stomach and realized she needed to get out of there right now. She ran outside and searched the perimeter of the house. She thought maybe someone was outside talking and the acoustics made them sounded closer than they were. No one was there. The house was surrounded by at least a square mile of open field. No one was around. She decided to leave without her pictures. My mom told me this story of a large colonial house that we moved in when I was about 4 and I had an imaginary friend named Jenny. Apparently my mom always had a weird feeling about the house and one day out of the blue I told her that I had been playing with a little girl named Jenny. She thought that it was just a phase. I told her Jenny wanted me to let the cat into the basement so she can play with it. She let me and my cat never came back. That creeped her out. Then a few days later I told her Jenny wanted me to come to the basement to play with her. She told me no and to go to bed. I did, and when I woke up I had deep scratches on my back and legs. My mom sent me to my grandparents and proceeded to look up stuff on the house. She found an old picture of the house and who used to live there. The house was built in like the late 1800s, and asked me if Jenny was in the picture. She said there was like 7 little girls in the picture and she knew who was Jenny, but I wouldn't have. I guess I pointed to Jenny without hesitation. She was scared because she had also learned that Jenny went into the basement and was never found after that day, so that family moved. After that incident with the picture we moved out of that house. I guess that was way too much for my mom. I was 18 when she told me that. I still think about it and think how scary that story is. This apparently happened to my dad. He told me a couple years ago about this one event that freaked him out. It was around 2002 when we had just moved into a new house. My dad was unpacking while my stepmom was at work and I was at school. My little brother was homesick and sleeping in his bedroom. So my father is unpacking and found his old Polaroid camera and starts playing with it. He decides to sneak into my brother's room to get a cute picture of him sleeping. He was about 6 at this time and really adorable. He opens the door and sees my brother curled up on the ledge right beside the window, his face turned away from my dad and against the glass. My dad is standing by the door and snaps a picture, quietly closing the door. As the picture develops, my brother suddenly comes out of the bathroom at the other end of the hall, crying because he was sick. My father is astonished and knows there was no way for little brother to get from the bedroom to the bathroom in mere seconds and without being seen. He opens the door quickly to check inside and nothing is there. The clincher is the picture. After getting my brother settled and back to sleep, my dad takes a look at the photograph. What should have been my brother sleeping with his head turned away became a picture of a little boy facing my father, the lower half of his face blurry and red. My dad doesn't believe in ghosts, but he was pretty freaked. He showed the picture to my stepmother and her sister. They kept it in a box in their bedroom and apparently used it as a nice conversation piece for a few years until we moved out of the house. One of our basement walls collapsed and it was unsafe to live there. It seems to have been lost in the move. I never had the pleasure of seeing the picture myself, but loads of my family saw it and they all agree it was creepy. We never experienced anything else abnormal in the house. This happened to me in December of 2001 when I was 9 going on 10. A little backstory, I never had a dad and my mom worked until 6 p.m. Keep in mind this was during the winter, no school, and it was in Upper Indiana. I had hiked out to the convenience store near sunset to get some supplies for the storm since my mom was stuck at work. I walked in and was greeted by the staff I knew, Dante, no, not Hicks. This was a 7 to 11, not a quick stop. Dante informed me that there was a blizzard warning and that he would drive me home so I didn't end up frozen in a ditch. So I bought around $40 in supplies, food, batteries, candles, matches, etc., and paid for them before Dante closed up shop and took me to his car. Dante owned a beater, a battered Honda CSX which often leaked oil and broke down, so I wasn't expecting this to be a flawless ride, but I sure as hell didn't expect what happened. About halfway to my house, it's also worth mentioning that Dante lived across the street from my house. The car breaks down. Normally this wasn't a problem, but it was snowing like a motherfucker and we didn't know what was wrong. Dante decides to walk to the nearest house around 1 mile away while I stay in the locked car to be safe. Around 20 minutes later, I feel a strange unsettling feeling. I look out the window and see something very odd in the distance, 3 glowing light hovering above the ground around half-mile away, 1 red, 1 blue, 1 yellow. I start freaking the fuck out and get on the floorboards for what seemed like hours, but in reality was around 20 minutes before Dante returns with another person. While the other person works on the car, I stand next to Dante while he protects me. He too sees the lights and becomes quite unsettled and decides to lock both of us in the car so nothing can happen to us. The man eventually gets the car started and Dante thanks him before gunning it out of there in a hurry. To this day, I have absolutely no idea what those lights could have been. It was in the middle of nowhere, no house, no cars, just cornfields all around. It still gives me the creeps over 13 years later. There's an abandoned factory building in my hometown, and a couple of friends and I decided to sneak into it one night. We walked around the first floor and look around, just some piles of stone, some old tools with an inch of dust on them, nothing really out of the ordinary for an old building like this. It was probably around or after midnight, so we couldn't see anything. This was also before any of us had a smartphone, so no flashlight apps, we just kinda shined our phone screens around. The building is entirely stone, so we figured it'd be safe to go up on the second floor, which you have to climb a weird spiral staircase to get to. I'm a big idiot, so I decided that I could lead the group up the stairs. As we're climbing the stairs, my buddy says that he thinks he can hear someone humming, and asks if it's any of us, and apparently it wasn't. As I reached the top of the stairs, the entire railing shook really hard like someone had hit it with something. We all jumped, and were reasonably scared, but for some reason we thought to press on. Well, I got 1 foot off of the spiral staircase and onto the second floor when we heard a very low but kinda loud and angry female voice shout, "Don't." It came from the second floor, like 10 feet away from me. There were plenty of windows, with moonlight shining through, but I couldn't see a shadow or anything. This was a group of 4 guys, including me, and we knew that none of us could have made that voice, and even the last guy in line behind me had heard it, and we all noped the fuck out of there as fast as we could without question. We never went back to figure out an explanation, but it's still one of the scariest things I've ever experienced. Broke into an abandoned supermarket when I was 14. Not sure what I was expecting to find. I was at the second level of the 2-level building observing this wide open expanse inside a building that had at one point been full of normal families shopping and employees working but which had now been forgotten. I was thinking how odd it was that I was the only one who had likely been inside for several years. I heard rats rustling off in the distance. I had entered from a large ventilation duct from behind the building. I sat there still looking downward and considering whether to venture down and further into the store, and how I would get back out if I did. I sat for a while considering, but suddenly I heard a loud noise from the front of the store. I thought perhaps the owner was entering to survey or something. Shit, good thing I had stayed put high and out of view. Two younger men entered moving suspiciously. They obviously were not the owners. It seemed like they were looking to loot anything that had been forgotten. They flashed flashlights around, and then as they shined them to the right around the corner from the main entrance where they entered, the direction of the rats I heard rustling about, the light uncovered a man standing facing them about 5 yards from them. This happened so fast, but I will always remember it in detail. It is burned into my memory. The man jerked his head around to look at them. His face was leathery and he had brown hair. His hands were dirty with something. He yelled at them, "You three are dead," in the most terrifying voice I've ever heard. They ran, he chased, and I got out as fast as I could. Only later did it occur to me that I was the third one and he had been staring at me the entire time. I was driving a shortcut from 29 Palms, California to Albuquerque, New Mexico. 29 Palms is located in the desolate high desert east of LA. The shortcut was all two-lane road through total nothingness, except for passing through Amboy, California. Amboy is a nearly abandoned town nearly as far below sea level as Death Valley, with a dormant volcano and lava field on one side and a salt flat on the other. It was also, at the time, a hotspot for satanic group activity. So I was driving by myself in the afternoon. I stopped in Amboy and snapped a picture of the city sign, just to prove I was there to friends who dared me to take that route to I-40. I got back in my car and proceeded to drive up into the mountain range between Amboy and I-40. Once I reached the top, I am driving north through a canyon with high grass on both sides of the road. Up ahead I see some stuff in the middle of the road. As I approach, I slow down to see a red Pontiac Fiero stopped sideways across both lanes, a suitcase open with clothes scattered everywhere and two bodies laying face down in the road, a man and a woman. I stop 100 feet or so away and the hair on the back of my neck is standing up. Being a Marine, I reach under the seat and pull out a 9mm pistol and chamber a round. Something seemed very wrong, it looked too perfect, as if it were staged. An ambush? Was I being paranoid? Something was just wrong. Getting out of the car seemed unthinkable, it was the horror movie move. As I scanned the road, I saw a line I could drive past the guy in the road on his left, swerve to the right side of the woman, behind the Fiero, and I'd be on the other side. I dropped it into first gear, punched it and drove the line I planned. I passed the back of the Fiero without hitting it or either of the bodies in the road. I continued forward a couple hundred feet and slowed down so I could breathe and let my heart slow down. As I looked up into the rearview mirror, I saw that the two bodies had gotten up to their knees and 20 or so people emerged from the tall grass on either side of the road by the car and bodies. At that moment my right foot smashed the gas pedal to the floor and did not let up until I had to slow down for the I-40 East on-ramp. I will never know what would have happened to me had I gotten out of the car to check on the bodies or stopped my car closer to them. Somehow I do not think it would have been good. Sometimes real life can be scarier than a movie. About 10 years ago, my mom worked at the church she attended. She was often there by herself as she did a lot of maintenance and cleaning when no church events were happening. Occasionally she took me because I was pretty young, and if I helped out she would usually buy me something. On one of these occasions I was in the main area of the church totally alone, where the sermon was held, sitting in a pew playing my Game Boy. All of a sudden I get this really anxious feeling in the pit of my stomach, like my fight or flight had just kicked in. I thought that was a little odd, so I looked around and nothing was different, but the tension in the air remained and it felt like I was seconds from being attacked. I got up to leave and I hear a really loud and sharp whistle which scared the shit out of me. I ran out of the room and watched through the windows on the door to see if it was just someone pranking me. Nothing moved, so I checked the parking lot and our vehicle was the only one there. About an hour later I went back into the room and checked every place where someone could be hiding, and found no one. The anxious feeling was also mysteriously gone. As I left the room, my mom is walking towards it with a brisk pace, grabs my arm and says we have to go. She looks pretty shaken. I ask her why we are leaving and she said she had a horrible feeling and there was a sharp whistle happening from somewhere inside of the totally empty room she was in. I spent my holidays on my grandparents' sheep station in rural Australia. When they started up, they had a few lambs and chooks go missing in the early hours, so they bought a pair of night dogs. These were huge, mean as fuck Pyrenean mountain dogs that were locked in a box stall in the stable during the day, and let out by Pa at night. They patrolled the property to prevent wild dogs, feral cats, foxes, dingoes and people stealing in at night. J-Dog and Ray Dog were the meanest asshole dogs you've ever met. The only one they wouldn't bite a chunk out of was Pa, so I only ever saw Jay and Ray from peeking out my bedroom window. One summer night I was there, lying on my bed, too hot and sweaty sticky to sleep. I was reading a Saddle Club book by angling it so the porch light outside my window was shining on the page. All of a sudden, the light was blocked. I turned my head, thinking the curtain had fallen across the window. Looming in the window was a massive dog head-shaped shadow. I gasped and snatched the curtain across the glass, and dived under the blanket. After my heart had stopped trying to beat out of my chest, I went to sleep. The next morning, Graham knocked on my door and told me not to go outside yet. Pa was cleaning up an accident. Accident was always a lambing gone wrong, a chook for dinner, a rabbit needing to be put down, or some other grisly thing that I never liked seeing. Eventually, being a kid and all, I decided that stay inside couldn't possibly mean the porch, so while Graham was making a few calls, I pulled on my boots and ran out the back door. The sight that met my eyes was nothing I will ever forget. Blood was everywhere. Feathers were strewn across the entire yard, with mounds of torn bodies and entrails lying in the dust. I turned to go back inside, and saw the area that was directly outside my bedroom window. Bloody streaks went up the wall, with blood and chunky something all over the outer sill. It looked like a bucket of red paint had been thrown at the wall. Stringy gore was clumped and smeared, dripping on every board. I stayed inside all day, allowed to watch videos the entire time. A few of Pa's mates came over and stayed for dinner after helping with the accident. I said that I'd seen blood on my window, and asked if a fox got past Ray and Jay and took some chickens. Ray and Jay had been found in the sheep dam, ripped up and well dead. 4 sheep were torn up, lambs as well. All of the chickens and geese. The rabbit hutch had the wire ripped off and my rabbits were dead. The barn cat and a litter of kittens. Sky, the ancient smooth collie that slept in with the sheep, was missing and wasn't found. I never asked, but I don't think that Pa ever found what shredded his animals, but I always keep my curtains drawn and I get bloody nervous if I'm outside at night. Okay. Here it goes. In school there used to be this boy called Alistair who was really weird, and he lived in a house 5 doors down from me and was new to the area when this all happened. He was really shy and has 0 friends. He was probably the most intelligent person I've ever met, but I'd occasionally go over to his house and play video games whilst our parents talked. Alistair had really dark vibe and wasn't normal. His room was full of those creepy drawings of faces and fires with incredible detail. He asked me to play the staring game with him. I started to stare at him, but he laughed and said, "Not that one." Confused, I followed him up to the attic where he immediately drew a white circle on the floor in chalk. It looked like he'd done this before with his immense focus. He sat perfectly in the circle and told me to be silent and to hold his hand. He stared into my eyes with intense conviction and gestured me to do the same. I sat there staring into his eyes before he broke into a smile and shook my head from side to side, then grabbed my chin and tilted my head upwards. To my absolute fucking horror, there was a tall woman stood behind him staring directly at my face and smiling. The scariest fucking smile I'd ever seen. I looked back at Alistair in terror where he smiled and said, "Can you see it?" I screamed yes. Almost in tears, and he rolled away from the circle and she was gone. I was crying immensely and had a huge feeling of dread as I walked downstairs. Alistair's mum smacked him and said, "Don't you fucking dare play that game again," knowing full well what had just happened. I ran home and cried. I spoke to Alistair the next day at school and he told me that she doesn't always go away. I just can't. There's a small graveyard near my home in Michigan. About 2 years ago, a group of my friends and I went ghost hunting there. It was a warm night, clear skies, and I was raring to catch a ghost on my friend's camera or tape recorder. Even a cell phone video would do. The cemetery is less than an acre, so it didn't take long to scope out. We broke into groups of 2 and 3 and traversed the grounds. I wandered with a few people, changing from group to group. I felt restless. Usually when we were ghost hunting, we cracked wise, but nobody was saying much. A group near a tall monument, at least 7 feet high and shrouded in vines, called us over. There seemed to be a cold spot about the size and shape of a very tall man. I waved my hands through the air. It did feel a bit cooler, but that could have been my imagination. Everyone began taking pictures, claiming they could see a figure in the digital photos. I hung near the back of the group, not seeing anything. I still felt disquieted. I didn't want to be here. That was when a cold shock squeezed my hand, right between the web of flesh between my right thumb and forefinger. I cried out, yanking my hand away. It hurt. The cold radiated slowly off my hand, and I retreated towards the gate. "I'm out." Something grabbed me. "I'm out." I was quickly followed by the rest of the party, not so much because of my encounter, but nobody wanted to be in there anymore. It wasn't until the morning the bruise showed up. Deep in the meat of my hand, Not a bad bruise, not bad enough to turn black and blue, but definitely there. Yellow and painful, right in the spot where I'd been grabbed by that cold hand. I haven't been back. My father used to live on the Marshall Islands in the Pacific Ocean, so him and his friends would routinely go fishing in the ocean very early in the morning. As you can imagine, being in the middle of the ocean on a fishing boat gave him and his friends an amazing view of the stars with almost no light pollution. One night they were out fishing past midnight and what looked like 3 different color lights appeared in the sky above the boat. At first, they appeared to be planets or some other type of light coming from space. However, these lights got larger. They appeared to be moving under their own influence, each one moving separately and of its own accord. My dad and his friends were freaked out, but too scared to move or turn on the engine of the boat. Suddenly, they began rotating together in a tight loop. Their speed increased and the lights descended on my dad and his friends in the boat. At that point all of them were sufficiently freaked, that's when they decided to book it, turned on the engine and roared away. For a while it looked like the craft was floating right above them, following them. My dad was absolutely terrified. Everyone was screaming. This craft was keeping up with the boat at top speed, which was going probably about 30 miles per hour. The craft then flew away at impossible speed horizontally, streaking out of sight. My dad is not a believer in the paranormal and is actually quite religious, so when he told me this I couldn't believe it. To this day, him and his 3 friends insist this is what they saw. One time when I was in 6th grade I was getting ready for school in the morning. I remember getting breakfast and sitting down at the kitchen table. I heard footsteps going down to the basement. At first I thought it was my dad because usually he would wake up to me going downstairs. But I heard my dad's loud snoring from the bedroom. So I go to the basement and investigate. From the corner of my eye I saw someone walking towards the door that led to the garage. As soon as I turned to the door I heard someone moving. So I called out my dad's name just to make sure if it was him, but he didn't reply. So I walked in the garage and I saw what looked like a man was a top hat. But the weird thing was it was a figure all in black like a shadow. There was nothing that described his facial features or what ethnicity he was, but he was just all black, not to be confused with a black person. So I ran back upstairs and went to my parents' room. I found my dad in the room and told him to wake up because I saw someone in the garage. He got his baseball bat and we both ran charging into the garage, but no one was there. To this day I have no idea what I saw exactly, but I remember researching and finding out that other people had seen something similar to what I saw. They call them shadow people. This happened to me about 6 years ago in my very early 20s. I was living with my grandparents as I had just broken up with my ex and was waiting for my new condo to be ready, so it was a transition phase for me. This was the second time I lived with them. I stayed with them when I first moved to the city where I, and they, currently live. Hey, free rent, and it was the first time away from my parents, and I was young so I guess they could keep an eye on me. Anyways, my grandparents had an awesome dog named Nikki. She was a border collie lab cross and just the sweetest dog. When I lived with them the first time around, she always used to burst into my bedroom in the middle of the night to make sure I was okay. Like she loudly banged open my closed door to get into my room. This would obviously wake me up as it was a loud bang whenever she did it. I would give her a pet and she would fall asleep on the other bed beside me, 2 twin beds. My mom and her sister used the room when they were kids. Fast forward a couple years and I'm living with my grandparents again, but Nikki passed away about a year earlier. Old age, she got sick. Sad, we all missed her. One night I was dead asleep in the same room I slept in before, and I got woken up by a loud bang and my door being opened, just like Nikki did. It freaked me out, but I managed to convince myself I was dreaming or something and went back to sleep. In the morning when I got up my door was actually open, although my grandmother had closed it a bit to give me some privacy. I usually always slept with my door closed, so that was unusual. Still, maybe I was dreaming, right? What sealed the deal for me is a couple days later both my grandparents, who slept in separate bedrooms, were talking to me and asked if the other night I heard Nikki barking outside. They both heard her barking at night. She had a distinctive loud bark and loved to stay outside, even in the dead of winter. So you could hear her bark from inside the house, especially from the bedrooms my grandparents were in as they backed onto the backyard. The night in question was the same night my door got flung open. Can't explain it, don't know what it was to this day. We eventually told the rest of the family, but of course, they didn't believe us. A couple of years ago an uncle of mine was going to be returning to Mexico after working a couple of years here in Maryland, so my mom and I take a weekend trip to visit before he leaves. On the day after we get there, my mom and I decide to explore the area a bit while my uncle is at work. There's not much to do close by since it's very rural. The weather that day is just cold and cloudy. So anyway, one day we go out to a little itty bitty town nearby. It's super cute, the houses/businesses are all painted different colors, etc. We park the car and walk to this museum of I can't remember what for, but doesn't matter because it turns out to be closed. Just then I noticed that since we entered that little town we hadn't seen a single person, walking or driving. We go back to the car and keep driving toward a mountain to go look at some nature since everything seemed to be closed. We had just gotten a brand new GPS, so I was watching our every move. We make our way up this one road taking us up the mountain, enjoying the glimpses of whatever sunlight seems to get through the clouds as it shines on the landscape below. We pass the huge remnants of an old building, maybe a church, as we reach the end of the road and see a sign for a national park. I look back at the GPS since it didn't say we were coming up to anything, certainly not a national, and nothing. It only showed we were at the end of the road. We park the car and take a look around and see a couple of old house foundations with signs. I didn't want to stray off too far from the car since we still hadn't seen anybody around, but my mom likes to read the historical signs, so we go check them out. We come to the first foundation, and I walk inside it first. We pose, take a pic with the camera, and I mention to my mom that it looks a whole lot like a movie we saw years ago about the Blair Witch. She laughs, and that's when I noticed it. I tell her to hold on a second and we remain quiet. Listen. Nothing, we hear absolutely nothing. It's as if the air was sucked out of the environment. No birds, no bugs, no leaves falling from the trees or even in wind. Nothing. She shrugged it off and we walked to the next little building we see. From the sign we found out that it was an unused mausoleum. I tell her that I'm super uncomfortable and want to leave. She says yeah, okay, finally. I thought. We go back down that only road and back through that ghost town we had gone through earlier and onto a more trafficked road with cars and people, and then we goof off the rest of the day and later go back to the house where we're staying with my uncle. We chat with him and his boss who dropped him off about the places we'd gone to that day. Wait, you guys went to that mountain over there? He pointed out the window of the dining room. Yes, why? We said. That's where those people went missing. A chill went down my spine. What people? You know, they even made a movie about it. I still remember seeing the missing persons posters at the gas stations. Yay, I slept with my back against the wall that night. 10/10 would not go back to revisit that particular area again. Want to hear the creepiest story? My sister was told this story that happened to these two guys, one of the guys she was dating. And they both told her this story at different times. So, the two guys were staying at their beach house and were driving in the area that didn't have a lot of houses, during the night. A girl was walking down the street, she was apparently wearing a white dress, they said it looked beachy. They asked where her house was and she said it was down the same street that their beach house was on. So they invited her to their house. She was watching TV between the two of them. They said she was hanging out with them for about 2 hours. Also, she wasn't really participating in the conversation they were having throughout the whole hangout. All of a sudden the girl said I have to go, and she walked towards the doorway and it dissipated when she reached the hall, right in front of their faces. And both guys were like WTF. That did not just happen. They apparently were frozen in shock. The one guy said he never went back to that beach house again. This still creeps me out to this day. I was walking down the linear path, Farmington River Canal Trail, in CT with my friends. We did stuff like that a lot. Living in a suburb, there wasn't never any danger as the town pretty much shut down after 8 p.m. It was pitch black out and we were all pretty creeped out, which is exactly what made it exciting. Adrenaline pumping and all that good stuff. So my friend John turns on his flashlight phone to illuminate the path ahead of us. I was all the way on the left, my friend was next to me and her boyfriend was next to her. On the right was John with the flashlight. I looked over my left shoulder and when I turned back to look at my friend there was a hand between our two faces. It was like a three-dimensional shadow, completely void of light. I screamed and we booked it for the rest of the mile down the path. We were walking down the path again a few weeks later. It was the night of the supermoon and we were doing it again. We hadn't walked down since the last incident, but we figured why not. This time both I and my friend saw it. A figure, void of light, crouched behind a bench. We haven't walked down that path since. It was just too freaky. When I was little, in our old house, my brother once had a fever. It was severe, around 41 degrees Celsius. Now before I write this, you know those experiences / that experience you had when you were little, that even though it may have been a long time ago you still remember it with crystal clear clarity. No? Well, that is certainly the case here, and I find it seriously freaky for some reason. So, I woke up because I heard a loud noise, Mostly just the end of it, which I can best describe as my brother screaming/yelling. So I went out of bed and saw him twitching around in his own bed and waving his arms as he was trying to get something off his body. I thought he had some kind of delirium going on, and shook him telling him nothing is there, be calm. Now that's not really weird, but after that, let me tell you, I remember going to bed again, and sleeping without any problems. As I woke up, I made my brother a nice breakfast to make him feel better, and brought it up to him on the bed. I asked something like, "Why did you shake so violently this night? Delirium, right?" My brother said that it was exactly that, and that he thought there were loads of spiders crawling swiftly back and forth, on his stomach just so he could see it, but not do anything about it. But he said it was easy to calm down after that. But then I told him I calmed him down so that wouldn't be surprising. He then said he didn't know what I was talking about. He said that during, and some moments after the delirium I was just standing there, looking at him, not even touched him. If that was also in that fantasy of his that night, I can't help but find the entire thing creepy. My mom has told me this story before and I still find it very fascinating, even though she was creeped out. This was in the 80s when my dad was stationed at BLAFB. I was 3 and my brother was a newborn. My parents were 21. My mom was upstairs putting my brother and I to bed. She said she heard the front door open and close. A chair at the table being pulled out and boots being dropped to the floor. She thought my dad was home, but when she came downstairs the chair was pulled out, no boots and the door was locked. About 30 minutes later she said my dad came home. She asked if he had been home, but he said he hadn't. My mom explained to him what happened and my dad just thought my mom was hearing things. So we moved to Guam when my dad got orders. It was when I was in my teens we moved back to Northern California. My parents thought it would be fun to see the old stomping grounds as they called it. When we got to our old house in Beale we saw they were tearing them down. My parents asked the base if they could take a piece of the house for remembrance. They said yes, and took the piece of wood that had the address on it. After that, strange things started happening. We lived in a brand new house that my parents had built. They hung up the address sign in the garage. We started hearing noises in the house like banging and scratching. Parents had house checked for rats, nothing. One day my parents found our cat in their shower with the door closed. This door was very high. The cat couldn't jump that high. I remember our phone ringing constantly and no one was on the other line. One day the phone kept ringing and ringing. My dad unplugged it. Kept ringing. Took the phone battery out, still ringing. My dad drop-kicked that phone and it smashed to pieces. Still ringing. The wires weren't even connected anymore. My dad yelled out, "Okay. You had your fun, now stop." And the phone stopped ringing. That freaked us out. My friend and I decided to do the Ouija board and I asked if there was a ghost in our house. It spelled out, "I missed you. Thank you for bringing me home." Told my parents and they said no more Ouija board in the house. I still played at my friend's house. I moved out at 18 and after my brother graduated my parents decided to build a house up in the hills. They brought the sign. Again, strange noises. But now things would appear around the house they never owned. My mom found a very old watch. Didn't belong to my dad. My dad found an old hammer in his garage. Didn't know where that came from. They lived there for a few years, sold the house and moved back to town. I started living with them because I was going through a divorce and had my son. In that house I kept hearing my name being called. Then I would hear instruments being played. My son started talking about a man in the house named Guy who had a little girl named Anya, but she was living somewhere else. My son told me Guy thought I looked like his daughter. My son was 3. I was freaked out, told my parents and they got rid of the address sign. Nothing else happened after that. They moved again and nothing has happened since. I do believe spirits attach themselves to objects. I still find the paranormal very interesting. Me and my friends were trying to scare ourselves one night. 5 of us loaded up in my buddy's small pickup truck, 2 laying down in the covered truck bed, and hit the road for the top of the mountain that was supposedly haunted. We made it to the top of the mountain and thought it was kind of lame. It was dark that night, however, like no dark that I have ever seen before. We got back in and went to the edge of town to an old graveyard we heard stuff about. We drove the truck up the dirt path on the graveyard quite some way until we stopped in front of a ditch. Dustin got out and dropped the tailgate and me and the other in the back got out. My friend Ricky and Justin stayed in the truck and Dustin, me and the other guy were talking in the back. Apparently the graveyard was once a meeting place for cultists in the area. During our conversation we heard our buddy Ricky screaming and pointing his flashlight up the hill to the right of the truck. We all looked over to see a greenish white something dash from the graves up into the forest. The footsteps were loud, and I mean loud. Dustin ran to the truck to drive and we jumped headfirst into the truck bed. We flew out of the graveyard in reverse until we hit the bottom where we heard them arguing over what they saw and who was going to get out to shut the tailgate. Eventually old Rick ran out, shut the tailgate and peeled rubber onto the road. We went home, talked about it, and with our combined accounts we established it looked something like the creepypasta creature the rake. If interested you can Google image the rake and look for the one on the trail cam. That's kinda like we saw. We went back several nights under the same conditions and never found anything else. Months later we were discussing the story at my buddy's house when his aunt heard us talking about seeing something white in a graveyard. Immediately, without her even knowing the story, she asked the graves behind Food City. It was, apparently a girl was killed there and according to her has been seen in a tight white dress. While it wasn't an exact match to what we thought we saw, it was odd and got me really thinking. This was a year ago and we haven't went back since. Just thought I would share. I'm not sure if I believe in the paranormal. I always try to find some sort of reasonable explanation before freaking myself out. But my new house has had some events happen that are hard to explain. Myself and my 5 other family members moved in a nearly brand new house this past summer in July. The house is only 3 years old and the previous family lived in it for 2 years. Now I'm not sure if this has anything to do with the incidents, but we actually live across the street from a fairly large cemetery. The cemetery is quite new and doesn't really give off any creepy vibes. The first incident happened about 2 weeks after we all moved in. I was sitting in the living room on the couch reading The Mist while enjoying our new fireplace. My sister was in the basement and my parents had gone out grocery shopping. I hear what sounds like a car pulling into our driveway and the garage doors opening. My dog, who always comes to the door to greet my parents when they get home, comes running out of the bedroom and looks out the front window like she usually does when they get home. I expect them to come in the back door any second, but I hear nothing. My dog is running back and forth from the front window to the front door. I finally get up to go and see what's taking them so long, and there is no one in the driveway. I figure maybe they are already in the garage, so I go and open the garage door and the garage is empty. At this point I'm a little bit freaked out but decide I'm just not used to the house and the noises it makes. My parents get home about 15 minutes later. I mention it to my sister and she tells me that when she was upstairs in the kitchen it sounded like someone had come in the garage, yet no one was there again. The next story involves my mom. This happened probably a month or so after we moved in. It was the middle of the day in the summer and I was in my room studying for my summer course finals. My mom was in the kitchen doing dishes. She calls to me from the kitchen and asks if I've just heard anything. I tell her no, I was just sitting in my room quietly. She then tells me that while she doing the dishes she heard a loud male voice, basically right in her ear, yell, "What are you doing?" It was so loud that she assumed I must have heard it too. Our house has very high ceilings and everything echoes, so you can hear noises from across the house. I didn't hear a thing. That story still freaks the both of us out because either the house is haunted, or my mom is losing her mind. This next story, and probably the last one I will mention because this post is already getting too long, is one that involves me, and has been happening since before Christmas now. I live in a small bedroom on the upper floor of the house. All of the bedrooms have carpet that make a very distinct sound when you walk across them. I usually sleep with earplugs in because we have a toddler living in the house and I enjoy my sleep. But occasionally when she is away for the evening at my sister's boyfriend's house, I'll only sleep with one earplug in and lay my other ear on my pillow so I have the freedom to hear when I like. Starting in the early winter sometime before Christmas, I am woken up around 4:30 in the morning to what sounds like somebody walking across my carpet at a regular pace. I wake up very easily to sound, so I'm not overly concerned. I immediately assume it is my cat and sit up in bed to see what he is doing. I turn on my cell phone and shine it around my room like a flashlight and I don't see anything. I'm a little scared at this point because I sat up so quickly there was no way my cat could have walked in and out of my room that fast. A few minutes later I hear my cat walking down the hallway and into my room. He was on the other side of the house. I'm a reasonable person, so I try to justify these noises to something to do with my earplug rubbing up on my pillow and making a sound similar to the sound of my carpet. However, the noises have continued on over the months, happening every few weeks or so for a couple nights in a row. Whether I have both earplugs in, or no earplugs in. At this point I've only mentioned this happening to my mom because she believes in paranormal stuff. I'm starting to think that I'm going insane, or beginning to develop schizophrenia or something, and am genuinely concerned about the noises I'm hearing at night. Finally, my mom tells me that my sister, who lives in the basement bedroom with her boyfriend, has been hearing the same noises at night. Except rather than hearing someone walking across their room, they've described it as someone crawling across their floor. When I heard this I didn't sleep for a couple nights. The last time I heard the noise in my room, it sounded like there was multiple footsteps running around in my room. I've been sleeping with both earplugs in lately and haven't heard anything for at least a month now. Growing up, there was this girl who always freaked the fuck out of the other neighborhood kids. For example, she told all the girls that in the forest behind her house there were dead, bloody people in it. All the kids freaked out and told their parents, which resulted in all the dads doing a search in the forest, only to find Hot Pocket wrappers and empty beer bottles. After that, all the neighborhood kids refused to go near her, including me. A few years later, my parents got a divorce. The day that the movers came to my dad's house to get my mom's stuff out, the girl comes out of nowhere. She said that Matt didn't like that my parents were getting a divorce. My dad ended up telling me that Matt was her imaginary friend that was often too physical. Even though I stopped being friends with her, her parents were still friends with my dad. Her parents told my dad that Matt could control the lights, even making the power go out one time. Matt also knocked on doors at night, but if he was ignored, the banging on the doors would start. 2 years after my parents' divorce, my dad decided that he would invite that whole family over to catch up. I was begging my dad not to, but he said it would be nice. So when they came over, my dad said to show the girl my bedroom since I got a new TV. I show her to my room and she is acting normal and complimenting my room. I was still creeped out because she just sat on the floor while I tried to put a movie into my DVD player. And I shit you not, but out of nowhere, mid-conversation, in the most deadpan voice, she said, "Matt's here." At that exact moment, the lights flickered and I fucking ran out of my room crying. Her parents ran into my room and dragged their daughter out and went home. I refused to sleep in my bedroom for weeks. I haven't heard much from that family ever since then. I heard that Matt still controlled the lights, but I don't know if he is still around. Even to this day, when the lights flicker or a bulb breaks, I still freak out.